This month on Spooky 30s, we all float. Welcome to Spooky 30s, a podcast where I, Stella Cheeks, a 30-something of questionable taste, invite my friends on to turn me into the horror-obsessed fangirl I look like but never was. It's our inaugural episode, which means you, the listener, have absolutely no idea what to expect. The concept is simple. For 30-plus years, I was an absolute bitch baby about the horror genre. I was scared of everything, like wake up from terrifying nightmares for months after watching a single scene kind of scared. But something happened when I entered my 30s. Maybe it was the crushing sense of morality and the doomed nature of our everyday reality, but I seem to have lost my sense of fear. At least when it comes to horror movies, please don't come and murder me. This, of course, means I have a whole lifetime of movies, books, and spooky nonsense to catch up on. So naturally, I turned to my friends for advice, and even more naturally, if you know me, I decided to turn it into a podcast. Each episode, I invite my super talented, interesting friends on. They pick a horror property that I just have to know. We watch it, read a bunch of cultural criticism, both peer-reviewed and publicly published, and then we have, hopefully, a super fun conversation about it for your ear holes. Now, this is a solo podcast, but it only makes sense that my first guest is my co-host on Not Your Demographic and Extracts, my forever work wife, Erin Cline.
Hello! Thank you for having me on your podcast.
Of course, it would be super weird and passive-aggressive if I didn't.
That's true.
For those listeners who somehow found this podcast and have no idea who are you to me?
How much time do we have? Stella and I have been friends for like 15, 16 years. Super, super long time.
Half of my life.
Half of your life. We'll hit half of my life next year, I think. Yeah, we went to college together. We grew up in the same town. We have been in a bunch of like theater productions together. I work for your burlesque company. We've been doing Not Your Demographic as a podcast for like 6.5 years. And we also co-host Extracts, which we've been doing for like 2 seasons. So yeah, we are like inextricably bound to each other's lives, basically.
Forever. So, our relationship aside, what is your relationship to the horror genre?
I really like horror. It's weird because I, as a kid, didn't find a lot of horror very scary. I found it very funny, which probably says a lot about me and like my own problems.
Sure says a lot about you, pal.
Sure says a lot about me. But I had sort of the reverse. When I hit my 30s, like now I find stuff scary. And so I'm having a good time like rediscovering old horror properties and reading new like horror books and like actually being frightened by it and enjoying that experience. I don't know how or why that happened, but now I'm like spooked 30s.
Yeah, that's an interesting like reversal. Like I feel like that happens. Like either you're really scared of stuff as a kid because you have like I can't control things or whatever, and then for me you hit a certain age and you're like I'm gonna fucking die anyways, who cares? And then like for you it's like I'm a kid, I'm fucking invincible.
Yes.
And now you're like oh my god, I'm gonna die.
When I met my husband, I told him like, oh yeah, I've just accepted I'll be dead by the time I'm 30, and he was like, that's horrifying. And I was like, oh yeah, it's like I live fast and dangerous. I'm definitely gonna be dead by the time I'm 30. And so when I actually hit 30 and went past it, I was like, oh my god, mortality is real. Holy shit.
That is such a young Erin Cline thing to say. Yeah. That is very funny.
That's me.
So today, if you didn't catch it from the very ominous opening of the podcast, we are talking about Stephen King's It.
Yes, we are.
We are talking about all of it. How did this come about? Why did we choose? Because you chose it, but I kind of also bullied you into it. Because full disclosure, we're going to do something else.
2 other things.
Yeah. We've discussed like, oh, I want you to be on my first episode, but what do we do? And we had totally landed on something. And then we changed our mind. We were like, no, we have to do it.
Yeah. I watched the miniseries a bunch as a kid. I fucking loved the miniseries. And again, like, didn't find it scary. Thought it was very funny. And rewatching the miniseries for this, there were times I definitely laughed out loud, like the ending. We got to the spider and I was just like, oh yeah, that's right. This bullshit. Yeah. But I had a friend who, when I was in like elementary school and middle school, was obsessed with Rocky Horror Picture Show. And so adjacent to that, loved Tim Curry.
Yes, that makes sense.
And so, yeah, of course. And so she gave me a VHS set of it. But one tape was the first part and one tape was the second part. And I rewatched those until those tapes died. Like, I loved the miniseries. I very, very clearly remember the last time I watched it because I was a freshman in high school, and it was 2003. There was the year that we had that big northeastern blackout. Mm-hmm. I was watching it while that fucking happened, and like, having never found it scary, it was that scene where it comes out of the showers where Eddie is in there and like opens his mouth, and then all of the power in my house went out.
Terrifying.
I was like, well, I guess I'm done with that shit. And then did not rewatch it until like a couple days ago when we rewatched it for this podcast. But like, I probably watched it easily a dozen times as a kid. I fucking loved the miniseries, but I'd never read the book. And then this year you did like a spooky Halloween reading, and so I had the audiobook. I bought it in between chapter 1 and chapter 2 coming out in 2017. Never finished.
And then you were like, LOL, this is 45 hours
so
long.
Fucking long. I was like, I'm never gonna do this. I own this now, but whatever. And so when you said that you were going to be doing the spooky reading, ooh, I was like, oh, this is like the perfect time to listen to this. And I told you, when we had already settled on another theme for this, that I'd considered doing it, but it's so fucking long. And I was like, I can't. That's rude. It's rude to pick something so fucking long. Even just the miniseries is like almost 4 hours long. And you were like, no, we're doing this.
Well, I was like, I'm definitely going to do the audiobook with you because I really like doing audiobooks. And then we finished the audiobook and I was like, I want to talk about this. And so like, especially if you're doing a horror podcast, right? Like you have to at some point talk about it. Mm-hmm. And I was like, if we wait a long time, we're going to forget everything that happens in this 45-hour long book. Yeah. So I think we just have to like out the gate do this property. Also, people seem to really like this property, so hopefully LOL people are listening.
Yeah.
For me, I have zero relationship to this property because I was like, I'm not going to watch a horror movie. I'm not afraid of clowns, but I was like, the word horror is in it. Like, I'm not going to go watch that for funsies. Never going to happen. And when we were reading the audiobook, I found that I was so invested in a way that I did not anticipate. And I think part of it is because I had no idea what to suspect. I knew nothing. All I knew was Pennywise the clown, there are some balloons, there's the phrase, we all float. That's it. That's all I knew. I knew nothing else. And I'm usually not somebody that cares about spoilers. And I was like, nobody fucking tell me anything about this. I don't want a single spoiler. I didn't look anything up. I wanted to know what was happening. And so like when things were revealed or when certain people didn't die, I was like super excited and overjoyed. And like somebody had mentioned the sex scene, which we'll get to. And I was like, that can't be a thing. And then when it happened, I was like, it's a thing. But it was really an interesting listening experience, because the audiobook is incredible.
Yes.
Like, I listen to a lot of audiobooks. This is probably the best produced audiobook I've ever listened to. It's incredible. And if you've ever read the book and like, oh, I'd like to read it again, or if you're like, I don't really want to read the book, it's so long, but I kind of want to read the book, I highly suggest the audiobook. It's super good.
It's narrated by Steven Weber, who does honestly just a phenomenal job. Like, I would agree. I think this is the best audiobook I've ever listened to. He really just blows it away. He's so good. And like, it can be a very difficult property because like they drop the N-word roughly 1,000 times.
Just
like
about 1,000,000 times.
It happens a lot.
And the F word a lot in the beginning.
Yep. There's a really, really intense like homophobic hate crime that happens right away at the beginning. But Steven Weber handles it in a way that like sometimes when you have a white narrator who's reading that kind of stuff, it's like, oh my God, I'm so disconnected from this. This feels so fucking inappropriate. But he really wraps in that idea of like, this is about fear and how those words are directly connected to fear and how important that is. And like, he makes it a part of the experience rather than just like, oh my God, this is so fucking unnecessary, which I really appreciated.
Absolutely. And he's like a very good voice actor. He does a really good job with the like very intense Maine accent.
Yes. His Maine accent was great.
His Maine accent was really good. And I was like, yep.
Yep. He also does a really good job with young Richie's voices and how he...
And Bill Stutter.
Yes. A bunch of complaints about the audiobook are about Bill's stutter, and it's like, that's literally the point. Like, it says over and over in the book about how adults like cannot handle his stutter, and like children allow him to like just get it out, and adults will be like, no, shut the fuck up, I can't deal with this anymore.
A big disappointment I had with the miniseries and the movie adaptations is I didn't think that they did the stutter enough.
No, not
and I was
at
like,
all.
it doesn't seem like a big deal. You guys really ruined the point of the stutter. Like,
Yes.
the point is that the losers club all have things that ostracize them and set them apart, and the fact that Bill Stutter was like just kind of there a little bit like was not a good choice.
No, I completely agree. It's so important to his character. They say so many times in the book, like, it is debilitating.
Yes.
It takes him forever to get shit out. And, like, that is such an important... It's written that way in the book, too. Like, it's really important that his stutter is debilitating.
Absolutely. Okay, so we're jumping a little bit ahead because we are excited to talk about this, and we have a lot to talk about. But on the off chance that you have no idea what we're talking about, I'm going to read a little synopsis that I just pulled from the back of the book because if you're a listener to Extracts, I do not like writing synopses. They were 7 teenagers when they first stumbled upon the horror. Now they are grown-up men and woman, singular, who have gone out into the big world to gain success and happiness. But the promise they made 27 years ago calls them back to reunite in the same place where as teenagers, they battled an evil creature that preyed on the city's children. Now, children are being murdered again, and the repressed memories of that terrifying summer return as they prepare once again to battle the monster lurking in Derry sewers.
Oh, come on, bucko. Don't you want a balloon?
So I think at this point it's safe to say I am in the minority of people who have no idea what happens in this book / miniseries / movies. I feel like most people, especially if you're listening to a horror podcasts, are like, yeah, I don't need you to give me a play-by-play.
Yeah.
So we're just going to kind of talk about it in order of how we watch or how we read and watched it, which is in published order. So the book, overall thoughts of the book.
The book fucking rules.
Yeah,
like, it's
really
really fucking good. I completely understand now why people love it, why it has this, like, really elevated place inside of, like, horror writing. I mean, it is pointed at as, like, the horror book in lots of places, which is true. Like, now having listened to the whole thing, like, there are pieces of it that I didn't love.
That don't age well.
That do not age well. It's very, I normally hate it when people say this, but it is very of its time in a very appropriate way. Like, these are children. Teenagers is a stretch. They're
I know. I wanted to change teenagers to, like, tweens.
They're like 11. They're young kids. And, like, young
that
kids.
very transitional period between childhood to adolescence to teenagehood to, like, adulthood is part of the point of the story.
Right, exactly. It's a coming of age story in lots of different ways and in lots of different kinds of ways for all of these different characters, which is, again, super, super important to the, like, structure of the plot. But I really liked the way that Mike was used in the book because it's very different than how the miniseries. I mean, the miniseries, I think now in hindsight does a better job, obviously does a much better job of interpreting Mike's character.
Mike, for those of you who don't know or don't remember, is the only black character.
Right. He becomes the librarian. He's the, like, lighthouse keeper. Right. And the way that the book is set up, it is told from his first person perspective.
The Derry interlude chapters are incredible and so important.
Yes, and, like, there's so much of those that get left out of the adaptations that I was honestly just blown away by. Like, all of the stuff about the black spot and the way that he interviews the town members, the old people, and, like, talks about I can't remember what the street was called, but the gang, the Bradley gang, that they, like, blow them away as a town. Like, I just found all of that so fascinating, and it was really interesting as someone who loved the miniseries, who had seen chapter 1 and 2 from 2017 and 2019, to read the book and be like, so much of this is new.
Yeah.
It was such a great experience. I was like, I'm so glad that we did this.
And then having read the book and then watching the miniseries and the 2 modern movies, there are a lot of, like, little Easter eggs that it's like, if you read the book, you get this. Like, you understand these things. Like the I Heart Dairy balloon.
Yeah.
Like, right? Like, that is...
And the stuff with the turtle in chapter 1 and 2, which is, like, basically completely left out of the miniseries for understandable reasons.
Oh, absolutely. 100%. 100%. Yeah, I think picking my favorite of the properties, like, the book is my favorite.
Yeah,
like,
I would agree
it would
with
be
that.
hard. But I also understand the, like, when we get to it, I like the miniseries and the movies in their own way, but the failings of them also make a lot of sense to me because it's like, honestly, the person who had the balls to fucking adapt that book in 1990, like, I'll look it up later, but, like, fucking, like, those are some cojones. Like,
For real. And to put it on TV? Like, what the fuck?
I'm going to take this insane 1,000+ page book and I'm going to turn it into a
TV miniseries.
TV miniseries.
over 2 episodes. Like, that's
Not enough episodes.
Not enough episodes.
When I heard the word miniseries, it made me think of like Good Omens or something with like miniseries, like 4+ episodes.
Yeah.
This should have had 4+ episodes.
This could have had 4+ episodes very easily. And like, I remember watching it as a kid. I thought that the miniseries was more like chapters 1 and 2, where it was more bifurcated with the young stuff as one part of it and then the old stuff as the like second part of it. But I really appreciate rewatching it, how much of it is more faithful to the book in the miniseries, and how like the flashbacks of Mike calling them and that like bringing back the childhood memories. I thought they did such a good job with the miniseries of that too. It's like, man, this adaptation fucking rules.
Yeah, it's really strong. That's one of my biggest complaints about the newer movies is that, so for those of you who don't know, like the book, the whole story, the entire 1,000 pages jumps from present day to when they're children, present day to when they're children. So it has parallels of like how they find stuff out and how they fight against Pennywise and how they confront Pennywise and confront their fears and each other. It's like all parallels from their childhood to adulthood, and it's woven in completely until the end. Like there is no part 1, part 2. Like that is not how this book is written. And it makes, I think that's part of the reason that he gets away with an 1,000-page book, because if it had been split in the book, I think
it would have been a series.
It would have been, or it would have been like boring. Like, yeah, but we kind of already did this with the kids. Like, I don't actually really care about this with the adults. But that also builds the tension of like them remembering, right? Like, oh, this, like they do in the miniseries, this reminds me of when a similar thing happened in the library when we were kids. And it really builds that horror tension, which is like why I think it is an effective book. And one of my biggest problems with the modern movies is that I think it was a huge mistake to do part 1, part 2 in the way that they did it. I think, yes, it would have been a little bit trickier to adapt, but they even do it in part of chapter 2 where they have like flashbacks a little bit. And I really think they should have tried to keep because that also builds that tension up. And I think it would have been a lot clearer, like the Eddie and Richie like relationship would have been a lot clearer and would have felt less ham-handed in the second one, where it's like one of these characters is gay. It's like if you had built that up in flashbacks a little bit more, I think it would have made a lot more sense. Yeah, I don't know.
I like understand why they did it. I mean, we'll get into the later movies. Right now we're talking about the book, but we're like, let's talk about all of it at once. I know.
It's kind of hard to not talk about them all at once. Like I'm making the like outline for the podcast, it seems like, well, we read them in this order, we watched them in this order, we should talk about them in this order. But like they are one big property, right? And like
they like stack on top of each other.
Absolutely. And like you see the changes that they made in the modern movies from like the failings of the miniseries, and you like there's a lot that goes on. So I feel like it's almost impossible to talk about them separately.
Yeah. I feel like we were talking before we started recording too about how like one of the hardest things about the book is that at the end it gets very like cosmological, and like I appreciated that especially in It Chapter 2, it becomes very meta about Stephen King, especially because Stephen King is in it. And it's like, your endings suck. Everybody hates your fucking endings.
So my relationship with Stephen King is this is the second Stephen King book I've ever read. The first one I read, the first of the Dark Tower series. And I've only seen like 2 Stephen King movies. I've seen like The Shining and The Mist, I think.
Barely Stephen King at that point. Anyway, keep going.
So, like, I don't have a deep relationship with Stephen King. I don't really know about him. So when we were reading the book and I texted you and I was like, what the fuck is happening in this ending? Like, I don't know. And you were like, yes, welcome to Stephen King's endings. They are not good. And so when I was watching
he has a reputation for a reason.
When I was watching chapter 2 and they brought that up in the very beginning with like Audra and Bill on movie set, and I was like, is this a read? And then throughout the whole movie I was like, oh, this is a read.
Yes.
This is a deep read.
Yeah. And it's like nice too to get Stephen King actually in it. Like, yeah, this is a wink and a nod. I also acknowledge that I'm aware. I'm very self-aware that this is like a cultural criticism about my books, is that the endings are shit a lot of the time.
Which is, I think, ironic because they changed a big part of the ending in It Chapter 2, and I think it was a huge fucking mistake.
I hated it.
So like in the book and the miniseries, once they defeat it for the final time, they lose their memories again. And it is
including Mike, who before had, because he was the lighthouse keeper and had never left Derry, had retained all of the memories that the rest of them had forgotten. I really like both in the miniseries and in the book that he's like, I'm part of this now.
Right.
I've also started to forget.
And also, I know that it's done now because I'm losing my memory. There's no need for a light keeper anymore or a lighthouse keeper anymore. And like, I guess like if you listen to Extracts, you know this. My fucking biggest weakness in any property is I am a slut for the found family. Yeah. Like, I literally texted Erin at one point and I was like, I'm so furious that everybody thinks about it and they think about this fucking clown when we should all be crying about this beautiful found family.
Yes.
Like, that is the point of this book to me. And so when they lose their memory, I'm even fucking tearing up when they lose their memory. It is heartbreaking.
Yes.
It is leaving the childhood behind. It is leaving your friends behind. It makes me fucking crazy. It makes me want to cry. And like when they retained their memory in the first one or in the second one in the new movie, I was like mad. I was so mad. I was like, for somebody who is so heartbroken, who literally cried while listening to the book, while watching the miniseries, while like thinking about it while watching the first one, you would think that I would be happy. I'd be like, my babies get to be friends forever. And I was like, oh, this really ruins a lot of it for me. A lot. Mm-hmm. Like it's really heartbreaking.
It's like integral to their stories that they move on and they forget. Like we've read a bunch of academic articles and a bunch of non-academic
which will be linked in the podcast page.
And some of them were about like the idea of the Boomer mythology and about how that's something that like as a culture, boomers, who these kids are a part of that generation, like that's very typical that they like get older and they forget their past and they're like, we've solved everything. We fixed racism. We don't have to think about this anymore. And so it's like integral to the fact that they're part of this generation also, that they get older and they again start to forget. It feels so untrue to part of it for me was that in It Chapter 1 and 2 they brought it up. It wasn't set in the 50s and it's not set in the 80s. The first one is set in 1989 and then Chapter 2 is set in 2017. So not even present day when the movies came out.
Well, the first one. Oh, no. Yeah, you're right. Because they waited 27 years.
Yeah, 27 years.
Spooky. I love that. I didn't realize that when you told me that, and I was like, oh, I fucking love that. Yeah. That's incredible.
Which like wasn't supposed to happen at first. It had originally been planned to come out sooner and it had a bunch of delays. And then I think once they realized like, oh, between the miniseries and Chapter 1 it's going to be exactly 27 years. Like, yes, that's the way to do this. Like, do not do any more adaptations for another 27 years. We do not fucking need them. Like that. And because it's such a generational story, I totally understand why they made that decision to bring it up into like present day. But I do think it changes the group. And so I kind of understand.
Because they are millennials instead of boomers. And like speaking as like millennial, like that's a different vibe.
Yeah, totally. And
big different vibe.
And like we as millennials do not have the grace to be allowed to forget a lot of our past because we've been marred by like economic disaster after economic disaster.
Well,
in
and
a way
also
that,
like social media and like the like rise of the internet and like connectivity is a part of our lives.
Right. And so it makes sense for that generation in the movie to not forget. But again, it's so important to this property that these kids are boomers that like, I don't like that. When I realized that's what was happening in It Chapter 1, I was just like, oh man, really? Like there's, and especially as we get into talking too about like Richie and Eddie and the way that their characters are interpreted, I think it makes so much more sense for 50s to 80s stories, the way that they both like are queer coded, but also the way that they both just do not deal with the fact that they are gay or possibly gay or queer in some way, and how that like impacts their lives forever. Whereas like set in a property today, I understand how that could still happen. We listened to an episode of
The Overinvested Pod.
Yes, the Overinvested
Which
Pod.
is a great podcast if you want to listen to some like cultural criticism.
Yes, I really enjoyed the host's vibe. I deeply disagreed with like almost everything they said.
So the reason we listen, I encourage Erin to listen to this, is because the two hosts of that podcast don't have a relationship with the book, don't have a relationship with the miniseries. So it was really, I thought, important to listen to a criticism of people who are just viewing it without the deep love of this beautiful found family.
Right.
And it is interesting the things that are pulled out of like, well, this seems very regressive. This doesn't really make sense. This seems shoehorned in. And like, I think if you don't have the relationship to it, like it can feel that way, especially with like Mike and Bev and like
yes,
Reddy, which is their ship name.
cute. But like they talked about, it was weird because they went a little back and forth on it where they were like, well, there's this like horrific hate crime at the beginning of it, chapter 2, which is the beginning of the book. But then it also feels like the stakes for Richie coming out are so different in 2017. But I was also thinking about this. I was listening to that podcast this morning, and on my way over here, I was like really trying to like grapple with my thoughts about like yes, but no, and like he's from a small town, and that like is ingrained in you in a way.
He's also a celebrity.
That's what I was just gonna say. Like, I think it's a really great choice. So in the book, he's a radio host, which works, and
Who
like
does like voices. He's like a morning radio.
He's a shock jock.
Yeah, he's a shock jock. That's exactly right.
And like that's for the time that it was written and to be an 80s property, that works. Like I think that that's really smart, and the way they like reinterpret that in the miniseries as like a late night host almost, I feel like works really well. And in the 2017/19 version, he's a stand-up comedian,
right?
And like
who doesn't write his own jokes?
Which I really enjoy, and I think is really important to the fact that he's gay. That like he's not writing his own material, which means that he's probably doing material that is very hypocritical if he was to come out.
Or very broad, over the plate stuff. That's like he just seems like another like regular white dude doing comedy,
right? And like that is still a problem in Hollywood today. Like if you come out as, it's so weird too, because even in stand-up comedy, like there are women who are out, like Judy Gold and Hannah Gadsby and Ellen DeGeneres is a great example. Like you can be a gay woman in stand-up comedy in a way that like is not accepted for men yet, which is fucking bizarre, but is
not to say that they don't exist. There's like lots of them, but like the struggle is very different.
And like if you think of like Netflix comedy special comedians now, like how many of them are gay?
Yeah,
like one. Like it's not a lot. And so that idea that Richie is like deeply worried about what could actually happen to his career, I think does make sense in this context. But like, I agree that in 2017, the stakes are just so different than in 84 when this is like originally set to. So it's hard to like reinterpret that into today. But I feel like we were talking too about the way that like there is subtext in the book about Reddy.
Yeah.
But
which you picked up on a lot more than I did. Like I didn't see it in the book, which is hilarious because I'm the one that's like everybody goes all the time. But I was like, I think too, I was just very invested in the whole like gang more. I was like, I want you all to be like a weird polycule, if anything. I want you to be like platonic friends or like all in polycule together, which is like, I guess skipping ahead is a little bit of the problem I had with the sex scene, because I was like, it should have just been an actual orgy.
I thought it was going to be an actual orgy. I thought that was going to be like the culmination of Reddy, is they were going to like fuck his kids, but like they just didn't.
So table that. We'll continue with the Reddy thing. But like, yeah, I think I didn't pick up on the subtext at all. I obviously picked up on it a lot more in It Chapter 2, and specifically in the flashbacks to the kids in It Chapter 2, like the scene where Eddie and Richie are like sharing a hammock.
I know, so cute.
Which is why I think that they really should have, if they were going to make the choice to make Richie at least canonically queer, because we kind of don't know about Eddie. He could be, couldn't be, but like we do see it from Richie's perspective, and that's Pennywise's big threat to him. Like,
I'm gonna out you.
Essentially. And like the gay guy that gets murdered is the one that hands Richie the flyer. Like that was a great choice. Yeah, that was a really good visual choice. If they were gonna make him canonically queer, which I think was a good choice. Like if you're gonna do it, like don't queer bait us, just actually do it and like actually have some like representation. I think that it would have made a lot more sense if they had the flashbacks, like more flashbacks.
And like I feel like in the miniseries, Eddie is coded way more queer. Like,
well, Eddie is also a virgin in the miniseries.
He's a virgin. He's not married, which is not true to the book, because like the whole thing in the book is that
he marries his mother.
He marries his mother. Yeah,
or
exactly.
A woman like his mother.
Someone very similar to his mother. That scene where he's like, "Oh my god, I'm looking at a photo of my mom from when she was younger, and I'm looking at Myra's photo from our wedding. Oh my fucking god, I married my mom." Like,
well, and even the parallel scenes of like the scenes in the book of his mother, and then the one scene with his wife,
who's
like
hysterical. Yeah.
Also, like sidebar, there's something going on in the King family because both Joe Hill and Stephen King hate fat people.
They really do.
As somebody who loves Joe Hill and has read every single thing that Joe Hill's written, they fucking hate fat people, and I don't know why.
But it's also weird too because it's like very explicitly written into the book that it's bad that people hate him because he's fat. Like, it's,
and I would say like in a lot of Joe Hill stuff too, it is like it there is that dynamic too where there'll be like characters where you're like in Nosferatu, like the husband, like he is presented as one of the heroes and he has to battle against it in the same way kind of that like Ben does. But then in the same like book or in the same like universe, they'll be like, but this fucking disgusting fat person. Yeah. And it's like, I feel like you maybe have a lot of identity issues that you're dealing with.
Yes. And in the miniseries with Eddie too, like he's still living with his mother, which in the 80s is like pretty clear. Like
yes.
that's what that means. And then he gets to the end and he's like, I only ever loved you guys. Like that seems very clear. And like,
but then he's a virgin sacrifice.
Yeah, he winds up being a virgin sacrifice. I mean, that's like, it's hard because the idea too is like the two weakest members of the group are Stanley, who's a coward and is like so wrapped up in the idea of like, this doesn't empirically make sense. I cannot compartmentalize this, which is like very
Bird Journal is telling me that that this is not right.
Yeah, and like it's very rooted in his like Jewish identity and the identity of people as they like compartmentalize and forget the Holocaust as that generation aged. Like we just can't conceptualize that scale of genocide and evil, and like that's very written into his character, and so he becomes also sort of a sacrifice, but like in a completely different way than Eddie does, where Eddie is like very much coded in the miniseries, not even coded, full out, like they call him a girly boy, they talk about how he's very effeminate, like his whole deal is that he is like gay without being
right,
using
and he comes
the word.
out as saying like he like almost comes out as like homo-romantic, as like I can't have sex with anybody that I don't love and I only love you guys, which is really a great moment with the found family stuff, but it's also like this is a group of a bunch of dudes.
Yeah. And Bev.
I do think there's part of me that thinks like I think the queer coding was obviously happening, and also like they wanted to do a virgin sacrifice. But I also there was a part of me that was like, I think whoever wrote this miniseries is like, you know how we're gonna say that they never did the sex scene? We're gonna make one of them a virgin.
Yes.
And then we're never gonna talk about it.
We're not gonna talk about this anymore. That did not happen.
Couldn't have happened because this one's still got a speak card.
But Eddie's last words in the book are Richie, and then he fucking dies. Like that. As soon as I got to that, I was like, oh, okay.
But in the movie, at chapter 2, he says, Richie, I fucked your mom. Which part of me is like, I think we expected him to say like, I love you. And I think he, even in the face of his death, like, I think that was like a real moment of he's still afraid, right?
Yes.
And so he falls back on the way that Richie and Eddie talk to each other, and they have almost their own coded language of like, I can't tell you I love you, but you're the only person I can poke at like this. And when I'm mean to you, it's like school age bullying.
Yes.
When I'm mean to you, I love you.
It's
and they
love you.
They have this banter.
Also, when he's like, I think I killed it. He runs over to Richie and he's like, Richie, I did it. Oh my God, Richie, I'm so excited. And then gets fucking stabbed.
And I think it's really important too that like that scene in the restaurant that like Eddie and Richie, their banter clicks immediately.
Yes.
It's right back into place. And that's the beautiful moment of that scene in the book, in the miniseries, and in the movies. That scene where they all come together and it's like no time has passed. Like it's truly
they get
one
that
of the,
right in all three of those.
They
like
really
that,
do.
That works completely in all of them.
It's like, again, I'm a bitch for found families. It's a perfect scene. Like I love it so much. But their banter and their like secret language almost like comes back immediately. And so that moment, as much as I kind of hated it when I watched it, the more I think about it, I'm like, that's him telling him he loves him in a way that is unique to them.
Yes. Yep.
And like you even see it on Richie's face, on Bill Hader's face, where he's like, he's expecting a love declaration.
He's expecting him to say I love you.
And then he has kind of like a
what the fuck?
And then he laughs and he's like, yeah, this is a man I love, that I've loved my whole life.
Right. Yeah. that scene too where they come out and they're in the cistern and Bill Hader starts crying. Oh my god,
crying now.
I started crying so hard when I watched it. I was like, oh fuck.
And honestly, I expected when they're all like washing or whatever in the dirty water and they're like making fun of it, I expected him to like come out then too to them. And I can see both views of it because we read a couple articles that I'll link in our notes. We read one from them.us called "It Chapter 2 Reckons with Stephen King's Troubling Legacy of LGBTQ Representation." We also read one from Tor.com by Alex London called "When Horror Becomes Strength: Queer Armor in Stephen King's It," and he's a gay man.
Yeah, that one was really good.
Yeah, he grapples with like there's a lot of like quote negative representation, but as like a gay man reading the book and seeing the things like or seeing the movies and stuff, like there was a part of it that I really really related to. And there's like a lot of pushback of like, well, what he didn't even fully come out, right? And like we were listening to the Overinvested pod, like what is the threat that he is facing in 2019? Like, yes, it's not safe to come out everywhere, but like certainly like
to these people it should be safe.
Right. It should be a lot safer than it is in like 1990 or in the 80s, right? And so like what is the struggle there? But I think him not coming out to the Losers Club, I think it was the right choice because he didn't need to come out to them.
They knew.
Right?
They understood what was happening when he started to cry.
Right.
Like, oh, fuck. Yeah, we all get it. We all understand what's going on. And like one of the other things too that it was pointed out in one of the articles we read, I think it might have been that same one, about how like it's written in the book too that Eddie, a horrific germaphobe,
hypochondriac in the fucking AIDS crisis.
Right. Asks for a lick of his lollipop and wants to share spit with Richie in a way that he doesn't do with like any other character. And it's not like those people wouldn't notice that. It's not like that gang of kids wouldn't understand that empirically. It also felt to me there were times too where in the book it felt like Eddie was in love with Bill. Like he worships him in a way that like I think establishes him.
But they
as
all loved Bill,
right?
Like.
But I think the way that Eddie is written as like more of a queer coded character, I think that also hints in that direction too. Where I mean, when you're a kid, you have a crush on like 8 different fucking people, and so it feels like, oh well, Bill was my first crush, and then there's Richie. And now Richie is this person that I've like carried on into adulthood. And then again with Bill Hader's scene where they all just kind of like envelop him, like you're right, he doesn't have to come out. Like they already know. And especially there's that line from Bev during the dinner where they're like, oh, Richie, did you get married? She's like, there's no fucking way Richie got married. Like that definitely didn't happen. Like also feels like it points in that same direction as well.
Like we all know you don't have to come out to us if you're not ready or whatever. Like we all know, which is like a very real queer experience.
Yes.
I'm pointing at myself.
Yeah. Like come out on your own terms.
Even
it's okay.
with your very, very best friends, like it sometimes is a hurdle you can't overcome until you're ready. And so having a known acceptance like makes things a lot more. So like I get why people might be upset with it. And maybe in 2019 it isn't enough. But I do think for Richie's character and Eddie, it does make sense a lot.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, let's just talk about it. Let's talk about the sex scene.
Okay, it's not great.
Here are my caveats. It's not presented in a sexy way.
Not at all. Not even remotely.
Thank fucking God. No. It's not sexy.
Yeah.
It's not graphic.
No, not really.
It's very
there are
like
pieces of it that
yeah,
are
but
graphic,
it's not like
but not like.
I read a lot of fucked up shit. It's not graphic.
Yeah, fair. That's fair.
At least they're all the same age.
Yes.
They have a foundation together.
Yes.
It does not feel pedophilic in that way.
Right.
I do think it is very interesting the way it is written, how it utilizes the word it.
Yes.
Because when we talk about sex culturally a lot, we're still like, oh, have you lost it?
Have you done it?
Have you done it?
Yeah.
Do you still have it?
Do your parents do it?
Right. And so the use of the word it that up until that point has been associated with this horrific monster and how that almost takes the power away from that word or transitions that word is very interesting.
And it's also something that Beverly has been told over and over and over, you're a slut,
right.
you're a slutty child.
Even though
like,
she's not.
She's not at all. Like there's nothing.
She's just like a pretty child. And
she's
so people
just
are like,
a
you're
girl.
pretty, so you must be a slut.
Right, exactly. And like the way that, especially in the movies, it's we talked about this while we were reading it. In the book, Beverly's mother is alive and exists in this household of abuse.
Which is worse, actually.
Is so much worse.
It's like, I think, a little bit of a cop-out in the movies and the miniseries because, like, she notices the abuse, probably also is abused, doesn't say anything, and there's a really important moment where the mom says, does he touch you?
Right.
And Bev is confused by that. And like the mom sees the confusion and is like, oh, I don't have to worry about this yet.
Right. And nothing is done about it. And that's like a huge part of the book too, is this, it's said over and over, like, children exist below the sight line. And so it's like, if adults can't see you, you're not real. You're like a ghost that doesn't actually exist. And the fact that her mother does that with her and with this like very prevalent threat of abuse that's definitely going to happen at some point is super fucked up. And so I understand why in the miniseries and in the movie they were like, let's just make this explicit in ways that it's not necessarily in the book by removing the mother and like pushing it up like a half notch again, which is super fucked up, but is super important to Bev's character.
Right.
Like, she has this idea placed upon her, and
the dad is, in the book, in the miniseries, in the movie, has, well, less in the miniseries, but in the book and the movie has that, like, are you still my girl? Let me check you. Especially in the book. It's very graphic in the book. He like tries to quote check her hymen, and that's when she beats him and leaves. Like, it is like, I am going to perpetrate this on you in the guise of like checking to see if you're still safe. But it, like, that was the moment.
I'm going to assault you. Yeah.
That was the moment when like the first like sexual like assault was going to happen. And that's when she fights back. So like thinking about all of that stuff in terms of the sex scene, the fact that Bev makes the choice to get rid of her hymen, to lose her virginity with these people that she like cares about and loves, almost as a defiance to her like father, I do think is important. Not that it needed to be all 6 of them. The weirdest part about it is that they like literally like fucking line up to fuck her, which is like, so weird.
Like, it's like they almost have like Mormon sex. It's like they're soaking. They're not like, they all just kind of like put their dicks inside and are like, is this how we do it?
Yeah, because they're like 11.
They don't know what the fuck they're doing.
And so it's also supposed to be this like, they're stuck in the cave.
Also, let's not glance past the fact that they're having sex in like
a sewer
2 miles below the city. They're literally covered in shit,
gray water and zombie parts. And, like spider guts.
They are
like whatever.
Disgusting. There is like nothing. They're also in the pitch dark too, so they can't.
So they're just
see anything.
They're literally fumbling. Like, is this where I put my tiny tween dick? Like, it's not a sexy scene. It's just like not. And it's presented as like, we're stuck. We don't know how to get out. But this like, she's like, I know how to save us, to like transition us almost from childhood to like adulthood or like tweenhood to teenagehood. Like, it's used as this like bridge. Like her like vagina is used as a bridge to like whatever. So like, I get why it's in there. And I don't, I mean, I'm not like happy about it, but it's not. I think when you hear like there's a child orgy, you have a lot of different expectations going into it, and then you read it and you're like, I mean, it's not good. I'm not happy about it, but and I think it could have been done in many other ways, but like, I see the point of it.
Yeah.
I'm glad they took it out.
Yeah, I don't ever need to see it in an adaptation.
And honestly, it should have been an actual orgy. It would have been a lot better if it was just an orgy. Not like better and like, ooh, creep, like I like this because I don't like pedophilia bad. But it would have made a different kind of sense for this found family, right?
Yeah.
And like, not that I don't think all of the characters are queer, but I feel like in that moment it would have been more effective for me.
Yeah.
Like, I think that there are some really beautiful platonic or relationships. Like, I love, and I think a thing that they kind of get right in the new movies, but they really get right in the miniseries, and then it's great in the books, is the friendship between Mike and Bill.
Yes, I agree.
Like, that is a beautiful platonic relationship. The scene in the miniseries where they fucking ride the bike together.
I know, it's so cute.
I was just like, I love everybody. Like, or like in the new movies where like, Mike is the one that's like, I have to convince Bill and then we can do it together.
Oh, where he drugs him with like ayahuasca in the closet.
Who hasn't among us drugged our friends with ayahuasca? like their
Oh my God.
relationship, or at the end of the movie, like I hate that they keep their memory, but that scene where they tell each other I love you, like
Yes.
that's not queer coded to me at all.
Not
That
at
is,
all.
we are two like people who have been through
Actual
an
hell.
insane traumatic event, an otherworldly traumatic event, and we are bound together for life, whether or not we remember or not. I love you. Like,
Yeah.
or the fact, like we read in this article that we have a lot of complicated feelings about.
Yes.
It's called The Horrors of White Male Innocence in It 2017 by Kyle Christensen and Scarlett L. Hester. We read in the one thing that I really liked about this, not one thing that I liked some, but there are a lot of things that have problems I have with this.
Disagreed with a lot of it.
When they talk about the blood bond, the fact, I think, watching it in 2021, you're like, what the fuck? Because like the idea of sharing blood is like, you know, very dangerous, but it's also a very like prominent kid thing of like, you know, the 50s and 60s, like that.
Yeah.
Like a blood bond was like it's a huge trope in like
Yeah.
child found family friendships, right? And it's also like this really important moment of like, I don't care about the color of your skin. I don't care about your gender. I don't care about your religion. I don't care about your disability. I don't care about your like your queerness. I don't care about any of that. We are literally bonded in blood. And I agree with it in this article that that's like a really important moment of like we are bound together forever, not just this oath, like we share a part of each other.
Right.
And it's, I mean, I know in the book they both have the sex and the blood bond, but you can get that effect of like we are tied together forever without having a child sex scene.
Yes. I felt like it worked too, though, like in the ways that it worked, I guess. Like part of that is that part of Eddie's gift is that he has this like innate sense of direction, which is why he later becomes like a very well-to-do driver. Like,
Yeah, in the miniseries and in the, well, what's his job in the miniseries?
he's in the
He is.
miniseries. He owns a limousine company.
So in the miniseries and in the book, he owns like a fancy limousine company that touts celebrities around. I do personally like the change in the modern movies of him being a risk analysis like insurance man. Like that's incredible and makes a lot of sense. But in terms of like his innate sense of direction, it makes sense.
Well, they also hint at too, like there's like a wink and a nod about the limousine service because they show him at the beginning in like a limo driver's
Yeah.
uniform, basically in a
Before
black
he gets
suit.
hit by a car.
Before he gets hit by a car, like in a big black limousine. It like, oh, okay, they're doing this faithful, and then you find out later, oh, actually, no, I'm a risk analysis,
Which does make sense with how they interpret Eddie's character in the modern movies,
yes,
I think.
I would agree with that. But like that's part of it is that they've already started to lose this like childhood like gift and wonder because he started to lose his sense of childhood gift and like connection to his sense of direction. And then as soon as they have this sex scene, like, but that's what she's like, I know what will bind us to this, both to bind us as my vagina as a bridge outside of this. We will like bridge out of our childhood.
As my vagina as a bridge.
But then also like keeps that like creative urge inside of all of them. Like one of the things that I found really interesting too is that they say in the book that part of what happens with adults is that you lose your sense of wonder, your creativity ebbs, and that you just don't understand horror in the same way. Like as a kid, your imagination is profound. Like you can think of
Right.
horror in a completely different, non-rooted in reality way. And
Which is why a mimic style horror person who can see a teenage werewolf in your brain
right.
can like scare you in a way that it wouldn't be as scary as if you were an adult.
Right, like the
You'd
ideas
be like,
of
here are your taxes, and you'd be like, oh.
yeah, exactly. The things that like scare you as an adult are very different and are very like rooted in reality in a way that it's not for children. But I found that interesting in that what all of the 7 do as adults involves some kind of creativity. Like they all have to hold on to that like childhood.
Bev is a clothing designer.
Yep. Bill's an author.
Mm-hmm.
Ben's an architect. Mike is a librarian.
Richie is some kind of
Comedian.
performance comedian.
Eddie still has that sense of direction and that because like I wouldn't normally think of a driver as someone who's creative, but he talks explicitly about like I can see my route through this city in a way that people do not understand.
But he's also a celebrity driver, which means that he has to have like a
Charisma.
charisma
Yes.
and like an intense like level of like bullshit.
Yes. And like Stan, as the weakest member, probably also has the weakest connection to creativity because he's like a super fancy accountant. But part of what they talk about explicitly when his wife is talking about their journey is about how he had this vision for what he was going to be and what their careers were going to be like in like a prophetic sense in a way that other people do not. And so I feel like that also like bonds him into that creativity thing too. And so I found that really interesting as especially with the book, but I think the miniseries does a good job too of like binding them into that sense of creativity too that like chapter 1 and 2 do not necessarily hold on to.
I will say a thing that I love about chapter 1 and 2, the like modern movies, chapter 2 specifically, I love how even though Stanley died, they made him an important like part, right? Like, because in the book and the miniseries, like Stanley dies and everybody is like heartbroken about it, and then there's the scene with the head,
which is horrifying,
which is super horrifying. I have a question. The scene with the head, which one was scariest for you?
I mean, the one in the book I think is the scariest because it's an adult seeing a child's head in a refrigerator.
And Mike sees him alone.
Yes. Mike has this
That's what I think is the scariest part about
experience.
It.
Right, exactly.
And he's almost like frozen. Like everybody else is in the next room and he could easily call like, hey, come see this. And he's like frozen with guilt. And also, like...
He feels responsible for Stanley's death.
Right, because he's the one that calls and then Stanley kills himself.
Right, and he's very aware of the fact that, like, I talked to him and then he literally killed himself immediately. And so, like, Mike has that sense of responsibility. And so that, like, reckoning with that of, I only remember you as a child because I, like, kept tabs on you. He hasn't seen him as an adult.
Right.
Like, he keeps tabs
on
them.
He doesn't have a Facebook.
Right, exactly. He's, like, read about him in the paper and he, like, has seen his, like, wedding announcements or whatever. But, like, his connection with him is as a child. And so when he sees him as a child, like, that is what he's picturing of, I caused your death. Like, you, child Stanley, I killed you because I brought this all back to you.
And in the miniseries, it's the adult head because I think in 1990 they were like, we're not going to put a child's head on TV. And then in the new one, they made it unnecessarily graphic and made his head like a spider. And I was like, this is dumb.
I appreciated that they did the spider because, and when they turned the clown into like the spider type character,
they were like, we get it, there's like a spider, but we're like not going to talk about it.
We're not going to do the terrible spider from the miniseries.
Spider that's like in a fight with a turtle or whatever. Like, fine.
Fine.
Hand wavy, whatever.
Oh, I was like 20 minutes ago we were talking about the cosmological parts of this too. I also feel like that is important because I think one of the things that's important about their story as adults is that they have forgotten and they're all like tainted by this experience. Like they all become very unusually successful.
Except for Mike because he doesn't leave.
And they all become infertile basically. But I think that is important to the cosmological nature of the town. Like because the town has released them and is like, this is your reward for leaving the town. Like that's why they're so successful is because this cosmological entity that was there before Derry is allowing this and is like setting this up for them and is like keeping them from having children, which could then generationally come back as like the monster killers. I think that without the cosmological mumbo jumbo that's thrown in at the end, like it doesn't work. Like, why would that happen? Why would they become unusually successful?
Right.
Why would they be infertile? Like, it really takes a interdimensional being who can control an entire town. And then we really see that, too, when the whole town literally fucking falls apart at the end.
Yeah, in the book, the town is, like,
it collapses
like,
on itself.
In the movies, the house falls apart and stuff.
Yes.
But in the book, it's the whole town has like a catastrophic event and like handfuls of people live. Like a lot of people die and like Main Street is destroyed and like the sewers collapse. Like,
and even after the like original event, it starts to sink into itself like afterwards too. And I feel like that wouldn't happen unless the entire town was connected by this like cosmological entity. Yeah. So while I think it is super fucking weird and like is very bizarre
and also hard to follow, and like even somebody who like reads a lot of sci-fi and reads a lot of like whatever, I was like, this is nonsense. This is hard to follow.
Yeah. I didn't find this stuff like when you finally get into its first person perspective as this like cosmological being, I didn't find that hard to follow.
All the turtle shit and the turtle and also like maybe another entity.
Yeah, like the turtle's dead. Oh no, the turtle's actually fucking dead. Just kidding. We have another thing that's here. Yeah. It's like, wait, what?
Yeah, I think that you could have had all of the cosmological stuff just with it and you didn't need the other two fake whatever, which I think they do pretty effectively in the modern movie of like, okay, so like a big scene that happens in the book is that Mike and Bill have this like out of body astral projection experience when they're like kids.
Mike and Richie.
Oh, it's Mike and Richie. You're right. Mike and Richie have this where they like see its arrival and they see the primordial beginning and they kind of learn what it is.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when the cosmological shit kind of comes in. And then in the modern movie, we see Mike and Bill have this through this like ayahuasca experience.
Right.
Which like, I get why they did it that way. I'm glad that they did do something with like seeing the beginning because like I do think that's a thing that is lacking in the miniseries, like where did this come from type deal.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of like a dumb ham-handed thing to just be like, I don't know, I went and saw some Native Americans.
Yeah,
like, we don't have to do that. It's we don't have to do that. Leave them alone. Leave them alone. But I do appreciate that they tried to do something with it, and I really appreciated that they brought in the visual of the bird.
Yes,
because that is a thing that is really missing. I think in the miniseries is that like the weird bird creature.
Right.
Yeah. So I don't know. It's hard. It's like an impossible thing to adapt unless you have like 10 episodes.
Right, exactly. I think if there were more episodes, there could be a way to focus like an entire episode on that.
Yeah, I almost wish that instead of 2 modern movies that they turned it into like a modern TV show.
Yeah, it had been a modern miniseries instead and expanded into like 6 to 10 episodes.
Because there's just so much that goes on. Okay, I want to talk about Mike.
Okay.
I want to talk about, so Mike is the only black character. I think that the way they adapted him in the miniseries is my favorite.
Yes,
I think that the way that they have him give like the presentation to the school and talking about the black spot, that was really, really
important. And he
important.
mentions the Bradley gang,
Yeah, I thought that was really, really effective.
I also thought it was very funny when the teacher was like, well, that was really disturbing. Thanks Mike.
I understand why they gave that role to Ben in the modern movies because he's like the library nerd, but I also felt like that made Mike's character in It Chapter 1 a one fucking note character.
Yeah.
They took a lot of his like point of existing away. Like the whole point is that Mike's dad has these scrapbooks and Mike's really invested in him and he like learns about them. And so I'm glad they kept that in the miniseries. I think the actor that they chose for the older Mike in the miniseries is phenomenal.
Oh yeah, he was
I think he does a really, really good job. I think that's the strongest one. I hate in the It Chapter 1 almost every choice that they made with Mike. It makes me fucking furious because I think this is really important, and this is why I think that to me the book is the least racist of the adaptations is because, and I get that this is a function of the book, there's more time. You get all the dairy interludes where you see Mike working and you see him respected in town and you see people interacting with him. Mike's dad also is a very successful businessman in the town. Despite all of the racism in the town, he is a black man with a good marriage, with a great son who owns a very successful business.
Who also confronts the town's racist and like almost murders him.
Yeah, who confronts the town's racist, the Henry Bauer's dad, who in the book is a fucking loser. Like I hated that they made him a cop. I was like, don't give him
I kind of liked that they made him a cop because I feel like you get the idea. I understand the idea that they were going for is like, you know, a cab, all cops are bastards, whatever. Like that, the evil of his father was so much easier to interpret.
You don't have to explain why, like that this guy's a loser and like whatever.
Right,
And hates the black family because, you know, the old American classic, I'm white and poor, therefore I'll blame a black person.
Right, exactly.
Which comes across really, really
it's effective in the book.
Yes. I get like you see a cop and you're like, that guy's bad.
He's racist.
Like that guy's racist. That's fair.
So I understand why they made that choice with
it's a quick
with Henry Bauer's dad.
visual thing.
Yes.
But in the book, young Mike is so fundamental to explaining what is happening. And you see him be the lighthouse keeper before he's the lighthouse keeper, right? You see that as a child. And they gave that all to Ben in the movie because he's a nerd that like hangs out in the library, which is like, okay, fine, but like
that's like true to Ben's character, but they're totally different things.
Yeah, and so that it made like Mike's character this flat thing, and also like having his parents die in a fire, I see that they were trying to invoke the black spot stuff.
Which I liked that, but I agree that overall it makes Mike a very one-dimensional character.
Right, and it makes it I just think that the choices made for his character in It Chapter 1 were so fucking weak and made it like a lot more. I see why an article was written like the horrors of like white innocence and like white male innocence, and it's talking about how this character of Mike is one-dimensional, is there to like, he is the only one really experiencing like this like real world horror. Like I saw my parents burn to death and that's the thing I'm seeing, versus like I'm seeing like a werewolf or whatever.
Well, that's the thing that I really disagreed with that article about, is that they posited that Mike is the only one who's experienced real traumatic horror in real life,
right.
Which is not true.
I agree with that. Like, it is not true. Like, Georgie fucking gets his arms ripped off.
Right. Like, Bill's brother is horrifically murdered, and then
Bev is experiencing, like,
actual
the threat of sexual assault every day.
In It Chapter 1 is experiencing sexual assault. Like, it is very clear that her father has actually assaulted her at this point. And then, like, Eddie is being actively tortured by his mother, who has Munchausen's by proxy, and like
Ben gets his stomach sliced open by Henry
exactly.
Bowers.
And like this article also posits like Mike is the only one who actually has to undergo like physical violence, which isn't true either.
Right,
like,
I agree.
Like Ben has to physically fight back against Henry. Bill punches Richie in the face. Like there is violence that occurs within like the white male innocence of that. But I understand the overall idea of this article of Mike being stripped down to this very one-dimensional character.
I think honestly, because part of the book, right, like especially with the use of the N-word and use of the F-word and the like scene where the gay characters get murdered, is that like there are real world fears too. Like it's not just a teenage werewolf. It's not just like a scary bird. It's there. These are real world fears. And like, unfortunately in our society, like Mike as a young black man is going to be more familiar with real world fears than like his counterparts, even though they are experiencing a different type of trauma. I think honestly it would have worked a lot better for me if he was seeing the black spot and didn't know what it was, and then learned about the black spot and it wasn't his parents. It pissed me off that it was his parents. It pissed me off that he immediately came from like a fucked up broken home and he had to be like bullied by his grandparents, and like because he has I hated that like idea of like, well, let's make the black kid have like a fucked up life.
Well, then they also make it in the second movie too. Like Mike explicitly says at the end, like, this wasn't real. Like I was being led by this evil entity to believe that my family was viewed in this way. And so it's hard then at that, like, if you put them both together and you have both Chapter 1 and Chapter 2, it's like, okay, well, was this real then? Were these experiences really what he was seeing them as, and this like violence that's being like perpetrated against him as a child by his grandparents, by this like bullying into killing these sheep? But like also the other thing about that article that I didn't like was that it was clear that they were just talking about Chapter 1 because they said that he killed Henry, which is not true. And like Henry's character is so important to Mike's character, and the way that he represents this very real world violence is so important to Mike's character that I thought that the fact that they like stripped that away in Chapters 1 and 2 also made that a lot harder, where it's like, okay, well, specifically what I'm talking about, what Mike says at the end of Chapter 2 is he at one point looks at this article, which I remember seeing in the theater and being like, they would never put this in the newspaper. What the fuck is this? But it's like 2 crackheads die in a drug house, like that, which is the clown making him see, or the clown, quote unquote, the like mythological entity of it making him see this. And then at the end you see that it's actually like a local, it's 2 locals die in an electrical fire. Right. And so it's the rest of the town, and the way that they like at one point he's delivering the meat packages and he's like, oh, his parents set that blaze. Like, did that actually happen? Probably not. But like, because they like mush his story together in this way, it becomes so unclear, and like it's just
really
handled...
do a disservice to Mike in the first one.
Yeah, and in consequence, in the second one, like his character is referred to as a madman, and
his
like,
character is all over the place in the second one.
It makes no sense. Why does he live in the attic of the library? Doesn't make any sense.
Cool.
I mean, it is cool, but like doesn't make any sense.
Well, because I think it's like their way of showing him. It's them he's poor. But also, like, and they do that in the miniseries where he's like,
Oh,
Bill's
this
like,
used-
oh, is this used to be the poor part of town? And Mike's like, still is. Want to come inside?
Yeah, this is my house.
I do say the one big change with Mike's character that I really liked in the movie, because I always hated this in the book and in the miniseries, I like that he gets to go into the sewers with them.
See, I didn't like that, but part of that is because we also read the Boomer Mythology article where they talk specifically about the miniseries, about how, like, even though Mike is a part of this group and even though these people look past his race and he becomes part of them, society still regulates him into this, like, subservient Negro role where, like, I went to do this thing for you, and so because of this I was like,
I went to get your coat and then I got stabbed.
Right, exactly. And like in the books it's like I was the one who stayed afterwards to clean up the library because this is my space and, like, I'm the one that's responsible for this, and because he's alone is attacked by Henry. Like, I think that that's also important, and that Boomer Mythology article talks about, like, the white kids as a symbol for racism caused the problem, and so they should be the one to fix it. But because then Mike doesn't get his own agency in participating in that, like, also, like, speaks to the idea of how our society and our culture is like, we fix racism, bye. Like,
Fair.
So I
think this is Stella's a slut for a found family and wants them to go into the sewer
Yes.
together. And
Yes.
so she can't think about it critically because she wants them to be good together forever.
yes, like, in theory, I like the idea of them all being down there together, but I think it also makes a lot of sense that the people who come out at the end are Richie, Bev, Bill, and Ben. Like, that Eddie dies down there and is left behind, and that Mike, because he doesn't go down, is allowed
But doesn't
to
die.
Is allowed to live because he doesn't go down there and, like, already went through this stabbing by a real person. Like, I think that works for his character too. Also, like, he has already sacrificed so much more than the rest of them have, and so he doesn't have to give this final sacrifice of going into the sewer too, which, like, in the book and the miniseries works for me in a way that, also because they just do this, like, weird reinterpretation of the, like, Native American thing.
Yeah,
like,
unnecessary. I know that they wanted to bring in the cosmological stuff, but they could have done it in, like,
literally any
he's
other
a
way.
fucking librarian. He could have read about it. He'd be like,
That's
I
what
found
happens
this
in the
myth.
book.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
that's what happens in the book. That's how they find the ritual of Chud.
Yeah, like, I get why they did it, but it was also like, then in the sewers, he's like specially pointed out by it, like, you lied to all your friends. You brought them down here and didn't tell them what actually happened at the end of this ritual. All of those people died. Fuck you, Mike. Felt shitty.
That's true.
Like, and again, like, they come down there
And they're
and
like, no, you just had to believe.
yeah, and like, and the fact
Like,
that
remember when I drugged you?
yeah, and the fact that it is like, you're an actual madman, like,
And you see him doubt himself in that moment too.
Yes.
Like, that actor. I think the actor that played.
I think he did a great job with a very shitty interpretation of that character.
I think that the casting of the children is great.
Yes.
Even though Mike doesn't get a lot to do, but I think all the children are great. At first I was like, Bev seems so much older than them. I don't like that. And then I was like, oh, but, like, women mature a lot faster than boys. Actually, it makes a lot of sense. I
Also
do
is
like
being
this.
actively assaulted,
Right.
like,
And
yeah.
also she's, like, a really good actress. I love all the kids. The adults, some of them I fucking love. I think some of the casting is brilliant. Bill Hader as Richie Tozier.
Oh my god,
amazing.
so good.
I think based on the kid that they cast as Eddie, the adult Eddie is perfect.
I completely agree. Also, that guy is a character on The Wire, and I did not realize that. And my husband Michael was watching with me, and he goes, immediately sits down, has seen 0 seconds of this movie. It's like halfway through. Eddie goes into the pharmacy and he goes, isn't that Ziggy from The Wire? And I was like, oh my God, it is. I've
never seen The Wire.
Shocked. It really blew me away. And once I realized that that's who that was, I was like, God, this was good casting.
I think the actor that they get to play adult Mike is really good casting. I think that Jessica Chastain as Bev is really good casting.
Especially for the girl who's cast as her as a child. Like,
Yeah. I think that James McAvoy objectively is trash casting, but it also, like, kind of makes sense for the world
he
that
could
they're
become
building.
that child could become James McAvoy. Let's talk about Ben. Let's talk about how fucking awful that casting is. It's so upsetting.
I mean, you're never gonna get better than
John Ritter.
John Ritter,
the perfect,
Ben.
Oh, the
Full
perfect.
disclosure, Ben is my favorite character.
Yes, Ben is also my favorite character.
The whole time I was texting Erin, I was like, when Ben dies, I'm gonna lose my shit.
I was like, I'm not
But
gonna
my boy
say
gets the
anything.
girl.
And like, it feels, it's like overcorrected from
They
the
overcorrected.
from the miniseries, where like in the book it is an actual love triangle. It does take the entire book for Bev to realize like actually
'Cause
Ben is my soulmate.
Ben writes the poem and Bev thinks it's Bill because all of them love or in love with Bill.
Right.
And so she's like, it must be Bill.
Right. And like part of what happens with the poem too is it's the first time she sees that someone cares about her individually, that like she is a person who is worthy of care and affection and admiration, and it's not necessarily just like your hair is winter fire. Like it is about her looks, but it's not about like you're beautiful and I want to fuck you. It's
Because
like
it reminds me of the fire that I have for you inside my soul.
right, exactly. And so because she thinks it's Bill, like going forward up until they're adults, she's like, and then they have sex as adults, she's like, wait, what? Hold on, this is not you. This isn't.
And that's the moment she remembers that she
I had
fucked.
all of you.
I took you all? Can you imagine forgetting that you fucked 6 other dudes?
And then while you're having sex, you're like,
Like, oh, I lost my virginity in a wild ass way. And magically didn't get a weird, crazy
staph infection. Nothing.
nothing like horrible, like gray water vagina infection. That's real magic.
But then in the miniseries, like I think that they course correct too much the other way, where like it's really clear they're gonna get together. Like,
Well, because he holds on to her like yearbook note.
well, no. I mean, even in the miniseries,
Oh,
like
yeah.
John Ritter and the woman who plays older Bev, like he's like
Bev,
massaging her.
young Bev, who's played by Becky from Supernatural. I was watching it and I was like, why does this girl look so familiar? Why is it it's so weird? And then I was like, it's Becky. It's the weird fangirl that writes Wincest canonically. It's Becky who fucks God. It's Becky.
Someone's had quite a career. But like he's like rubbing her shoulders while they're like remembering in the library, and then like he makes out with what he thinks is her, but it's actually the clown, and then they like actually make out when she realizes, oh my god, it was you who sent me the postcard. And then when they're in the sewers, they're like holding each other. Like it's much clearer in the miniseries that they're gonna end up together, which is good. Like they should. Like I think that's the appropriate thing to do, especially because they do use Audra in the miniseries, which I think is the right choice because I think it's important to Bill's character.
Also, it fucking saves the ending of the book.
Yeah.
Because that book is like a cosmological nightmare at the end. And the like fairy tale scene of Bill riding Audra on the bike to wake her up, the like, that's how he beats the devil. The like, it's not a kiss, it's the like the bike that brings her back. That's the last bit of magic. Saves that book.
Yeah, well, I think that the scene before that too, where
With Mike and Bill.
talking
but
about
Mike's-
that's part of it. Yeah,
Right. And Mike is also giving him he's like, I think I know what you're gonna do. I think you better do it soon. Like that's that whole scene to me.
yeah, okay.
Or else they just walk out of the sewer and then they go back to their lives and are like, Stan sent me a letter, which I liked, but also like the fact that they didn't use Tom or Audra really undercut. Not using Tom in the new movies really undercuts Bev's character a lot, actually.
Yes, I completely agree with that.
And then Audra's just like a bitch in the movie.
Yeah.
Instead of being like they're
super
like,
supportive character. They have a great
they have
marriage.
a fucking great marriage.
Yeah, it was such a weird choice in It Chapter 2 to make her like a raving bitch. It was so strange.
Your endings suck.
Yeah.
Goodbye.
Like
Fuck
peace
off.
out. Like okay, Jesus Christ. Like it. But because they like then tried to like course correct back towards this terrible casting of Ben in Chapter 2.
I think the actor is good. I thought he was fine, but I think he's just bad casting.
It's nonsense. There's no way that kid grows up to be that man. Their faces don't match. Like it's that. I don't care how much weight you lose. That's a different person. Like that does not make any sense. And so it like really pulls away from the story of Ben and Bev too, because you're like, what the fuck is
And
happening?
then they just have a dog at the end?
Yeah,
Where'd this
this-
dog from? Who fed your dog while you were away in Derry?
Great question. Well, they like completely remove all the infertility stuff too from It Chapter 2. And so then there's this dog that they throw in like, they have this baby, but it's a dog. And it's like, this isn't, this doesn't work at all. But when I was watching it, I was like, why this guy? Why did they pick this fucking CW ass looking motherfucker? It's because he was on the CW. He played one of the characters on CW's Beauty and the Beast for 70 episodes. Like, that's what he's well known for. And so knowing
we respect the CW,
but like knowing like, oh, that's why they picked this guy, because he is a CW ass looking motherfucker. Like, okay, this makes sense now why you went in this direction with Ben, because in the book, like, he talks about how he's like a model now, basically. Yeah. But like in my head, so is John Ritter. John Ritter's really fucking hot and looks really good in the miniseries.
Yeah, he's a little dreamboat.
And so it's like this very strange interpretation.
It makes sense that he would be an architect. Who the fuck? Why? If you look like that, why are you an architect?
Yeah, exactly.
What's the point?
Yeah, it's just like such weird and unrealistic casting, and I feel like it kind of ruins the character of Ben in It Chapter 2, where it's like...
Which sucks because he's my boy.
Yeah, and it just is like...
I think he did a good job with like longing looks, though. That's that CW training.
Yes, for sure. Definitely. But it was just so bizarre. And like, I don't love James McAvoy as Bill. I don't think he's very good casting objectively.
Yeah.
But like, I understand why they cast him. Like, it makes sense to me. And
He's
again...
a non-existent stutter.
Yeah, for real. Ridiculous. But then like, he could be that kid grown up. And so I totally understand too how those things like move in that direction. Yeah. Also, when I originally saw It Chapter 1 and 2, I did not love the casting of Eddie because he's so different than the Eddie from the miniseries. But knowing that it's the 80s and that he's then grown up later, like this time watching it, I enjoyed his casting a lot more. I forgot how funny he was.
He's so funny. I don't like the casting of... And I don't like how they deal with Eddie in the miniseries. That's my least favorite casting in the whole thing, I think.
I think as an adult, he is cast very well.
I like that actor.
Yeah.
But I didn't like the choices they made with Eddie in the miniseries. Okay, I know this podcast is going to be so long because we're literally covering so much, but we have to talk about Bev, and we have to talk about the blood scene where they clean up the blood together. Yes. I never really thought about that scene. I knew that, like, blood coming out of the sink, blah, menstruation, symbolism, blah, blah, blah. But we read an article. It's from Vox.com. It's called The Most Surprising Scene in the Movie Has Nothing to Do with Clowns. And it's about them cleaning up the blood by Aja Romano. And it's about the cleaning up the blood scene that happens in the It Chapter 2, which also happens in the book.
Mm-hmm. It Chapter 1.
Oh, yeah, It Chapter 1, sorry. It Chapter 1, and it also happens in the book where, like, the explosion of blood happens, right? And it happens kind of in the miniseries. Like, she at least shows it to them. The explosion of blood happens. The dad can't see it. Bev's like, am I going fucking crazy? Oh, my God, oh, my God. She brings the boys back to the house and is like, can you see this? And they're like, oh, fucking yeah, we can see this.
What the fuck happened here?
And then they all work together to clean it.
Yeah.
And I never really thought about it in this way, but the article does a really good job of like breaking it down about like the fact that everyone is like working together. They aren't making her feel bad about the blood. They're not like being like, ew, gross, ew, blood, girl stuff. They just accept her. They accept what she's seeing. They accept that she is different from them. Mm-hmm. And the way that, and in the book, King writes a line, as they clean up their blood, her heart grows lighter and lighter. And that's like the moment where she feels truly accepted by them. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I never really, surface level was like, blood, women, wow. But then thinking about it, it's like, oh yeah, that is like her moment of acceptance in the group. Mm-hmm. And it is really important. And I think that It Chapter 1 does an incredible job of that scene.
Yeah, I agree. It's weird because the tenor of that scene is so like relaxed, which really stands out from the rest of It Chapter 1 as well. Like there's
this moment of teamwork,
right? Exactly. They come together as a group, and like in the book, it's only Eddie, Richie, Stanley, and Bev, which is notable because
Bill is missing.
Yeah, exactly. Their leader is not there, and yet they still can like rally together around her. And Ben is not there, who has this like affinity and love for her, who like you would expect to do this. And we haven't met Mike yet at that point in the book either. And so I like in the book that it's them, and that especially Stanley really,
I was just gonna say,
like really takes charge and is like, we need
this is how you clean blood off.
Yeah,
this is how we're doing it. It's very Stanley's character. Like, I am the practical one. This is what we're doing.
Right. We're gonna go to the laundromat and we're all going to sit together while this all gets cleaned, and we'll wait until it's dry, and we will fold it, and we'll take it back to your house, and then we'll bid you adieu. Like I think they do such a good job with that in the book, and I like the way that it's reinterpreted both in the miniseries, even though it's not to the same extent, but then especially in It Chapter 1, where like you're right, they really embrace her, and that is when she becomes part of it. And it's like there are only a couple of like really like bebop's not the right word, but like lighthearted music scenes, and like that feels like that in the same way that Mike and Bill riding the bikes in the miniseries has that same like levity feel to it.
Well, that's the best part of this found family, and I think actually all versions of this do a good job of like they will be talking about something so fucking serious, and everybody will be sad, and they'll be talking about their trauma, they'll be talking about this monster that they have to fight, and then
they're one of them will Parcheesi or whatever.
One of them will like make a fucking dumb joke, and then they all like have this like, whew, it like reminds them that they're together
and that they're children.
That they're children, but it happens when they're adults too. Like it reminds them that no matter what they're facing, they do have each other. They are bound, which is part of the reason why it's so heartbreaking when they lose it again, which is like the real fucked up horror of it. I just love it so
Adulthood is the real horror. Just quickly, we already sort of talked about Henry, but how did you feel about the interpretations of Henry in the miniseries and then in the It Chapter 1 and 2?
I don't think it was super effective in the miniseries.
It's weird that he's so much older.
Yeah.
That he like becomes like an
and
actual old man.
And they like show the fear with the white hair or whatever. I don't think
Which is in the book. Like he does come out with completely white hair, and I kind of wish that they had done that in the modern movies, but it is not effective in the miniseries.
I don't think he's very effective in the miniseries. I think in Chapter 1 he's really effective.
He's a creepy ass fucking kid.
Yeah, he's really good at that. And then I think in Chapter 2, I think the casting is really good. You can see that kid grew up into that guy, and I think he does a really good job of playing the madness. But also like I didn't feel his like importance in the second movie the way that you feel it in the miniseries in the book.
And he's such an important character in the book, like really fucking important in the book. I mean, he is the manifestation in human form of
there's
that
a
evil.
scene. Yeah, there's a scene in the book where Pennywise is like, I can't touch them like you can touch them. Like if they start to believe, I might get fucked.
Right.
But regardless of if they believe or not, you're a
can kill
physical
them.
like entity who can kill them.
Right, exactly. And so I think it's interesting that they reinterpret Henry as being like actually batshit crazy in It Chapter 2, which works in some ways, but in other ways is like, I also feel like they just kill him off too quickly in both the miniseries and in the modern movies. Like, part of the whole idea is that he is just as much of a force.
Right. He doesn't feel as a big of a threat when they're adults.
Right.
Even though he like literally stabs people.
Yeah. I mean, also the fact
and he
that
gets stabbed in the face. Why did he stab his face?
I thought it was a weird choice to have Richie kill him. Like it feels like it really came out of nowhere, and like it feels inappropriate.
Yeah, but we got to watch Bill Hader throw up again.
Yeah, that's true. We did get to watch Bill Hader throw up, which both of those scenes were very well done, to be honest.
I did like how they did the montage of the calls and how everybody reacts to it differently.
Yeah, I thought
they
was
did a good
too.
job.
Also, one of the things that I really like about Henry in the book is that you don't find out until like literally the end. You think Bev married this abusive man, Tom. She married her father. She did not. She married Henry Bowers. Like one of the other kids, I believe it's Eddie, is like, why is this old Henry over here? What the fuck is this dude? And it's like this revelation that it's not just her father who abused her and who had this like really intense, horrific part of her childhood. Like Henry Bowers specifically
used like sex and sexual assault as a fear tactic.
Right, exactly. And like targeted her in a way that none of the other boys can really understand, even though like Eddie's a girly boy or Richie may possibly be gay. Like there's a real threat of physical and sexual violence against Beverly with Henry.
And Henry has a fucking queer sex scene in the book.
Yes, he does. Like him and Patrick Hockstetter, where Patrick is... We didn't even talk about Patrick Hockstetter.
We can't get into Patrick in the book.
Get into that.
He murders a baby.
He kills a fucking baby. It is a lot. It is so fucked up. Yeah.
But Henry does have like a queer like sex scene in the book.
Yes, exactly. And then like that's when he snaps too.
Yeah.
Like it's really clear in the book that is the moment where Henry is like completely disconnected, and that's when he starts actually killing people.
Right.
And like Henry actually kills people. It's not just that he's blamed for all the deaths of the other children. Like he does actually kill people. Like I'm glad that they kept that scene in Chapter 1, I think.
Where he kills his dad?
Yeah, where he kills his dad. Like it's really important to Henry's character that he actually commits this act of violence. Like, it matters in a way that I feel like the miniseries kind of like lets go and doesn't allow to exist at the level of importance that it did. So I wanted to make sure that we talked about him. So
there's just so much to talk about.
I know, there's just so fucking much. Okay.
So I have two questions that I kind of want to ask people in each episode. And the first is how do the horror elements either add or subtract to this property? And is the horror on top of the plot, or is the plot dependent on the horror?
Oh, the plot is definitely dependent on the horror.
I think
that's the whole point is that it's about fear.
Right.
Like, the whole town exists because of the fear.
I feel like these questions are like silly to ask about it because like the literal plot is about fear. And so like the horror elements add to it completely because like he is a mimic who takes your fear out of your head and becomes it. I will say, in terms of like adding or subtracting, even though the modern series has a lot, obviously a bigger budget, I felt like the least scary parts of the movies were the like monsters and stuff that Pennywise turned into. I thought that they were, even though they were like,
went too hard.
They went too hard. Exactly. They absolutely went too hard. I felt like if they had more of like childlike elements to them,
like the miniseries does.
Yeah, because they're pulling from the horror of the child or of the child's brain, and then while they relive the memories, that they're reliving like, oh yeah, the like teenage werewolf or whatever, which is clearly the only one I can remember because I've referenced it like 100 times.
The leper also exists, and the mummy for Ben. Right,
but like in the new series, like they just were like, oh, this is what we do in modern horror movies. We make these like grotesque CGI monsters, and I don't feel like it was as effective. Like those were the least effective parts. Like even just thinking about the old woman scene, the miniseries is way scarier than the new movie.
Yes.
It's way scarier. It's the scariest in the book. It's so fucked up.
It's really fucking scary in the book.
The only time I was genuinely scared, though, like I didn't have, like the only time I was genuinely scared was when I was reading the book.
Yeah, the book's like, there were definitely parts of reading it where I was like,
right.
This is like a legitimate. Listening to the Black Spot, I was at the gym, just like on the elliptical for that entire chapter, and by the end of it, my heart rate was at like 175. I was like, I need to get off of this machine. This is bad. Like it's part of it is Steven Weber's performance, is that he's so effective at it that like that scene with Mrs. Kirsch, like, is actually horrifying, and like the way that that's woven in. And it's the first time in the book, too, it's made explicitly clear that her dad wanted to fuck her. Yeah. And he materializes and says that. And, like, that is fucking horrifying. And I think in the miniseries, they do a much better job of him being in her dress, being the one who's actually, like, physically keeping her from leaving the building. I think that's much more effective. The creepy woman in Chapter 2, before she turns into the CGI monster...
Yeah,
very effective. And like when you see her like twitching in the background.
Yeah, but once they CGI'd
creepy.
it was like, well, you lost it.
And like there's that one quick scene where she runs naked across the doorway while Bev's like looking at the photos of her family. Way scarier than before the CGI monster. Like, oh my God, this old woman took all of her clothes off and is twitching in the background. Like, this is fucking scary.
Yeah, it's really scary.
And like, I wish it had just been her naked running at her as opposed to this big CGI
with
monster.
like rotted teeth and stuff.
Yes, exactly.
Because like a lot of their fears are these real world fears, and so turning it into a weird CGI monster, like it made sense. Like the fear that they made for Stanley of like the woman in the painting, I was fucking confused by.
Yes, it doesn't make sense.
Because I think maybe I was taking a note at that point, so I didn't even see the painting, and I had to Google it, and I was like, "What the fuck is it? Oh, a painting that I missed."
And it's weird too because like what Stanley sees in the book are the headless children who had drowned in the standpipe, which is then like reinterpreted into Ben seeing them in the library.
But he was seeing them as the like the Easter egg explosion.
Right. So it's like the murdered children has been like reinterpreted into Ben's fear, even though Ben's fear is this mummy, which it like I just thought that I understand why they reappropriated the fears for all the kids and like the way that you have to do that inside of both a miniseries and in these movies. I get, but I think they just made some weird fucking choices in the movies about the way that they interpreted the kids' fear. Like the scene in the miniseries where Stanley goes into the house and sees the mummy, which is weird, but like uses the bird book to like.
Yeah, I hated that they didn't use the bird book at all.
Yeah, like it just becomes not a thing about Stanley at all. He's like not interested in birds at all. They just like completely.
Stanley loves birds.
Stanley loves fucking birds. Not.
Phrasing. Not in this book.
Yeah, not in this book, thankfully. A lot of fucked up shit in this book, but there's no bestiality, thank God. But that scene where he goes into the house and the door slams behind him, rewatching it this time was one of the only times that like really jump scared me, because I was like prepared for the fact that like Stanley is about to confront this fear and be completely unprepared for it. It like actually got me. I was like, holy shit.
Yeah.
So I wasn't expecting. It was like, man, this is so effective.
There's a lot of overcompensation in many areas in It Chapter 2.
Yes, I would agree with that.
Okay, so every month I'm going to announce what we're doing, what we're talking about early, so that we can get some listener like memories, questions, feedback. Obviously, this podcast is going really long. Not all of them will be super long, but not all of them will be covering 4 different things.
Yeah, exactly.
So the overall like response a lot of people have, like one of our listeners, Jolene, said, it's been years since I've seen the original miniseries, but I will forever remember loving the first half and being bored by the second half. Tim Curry did such an amazing job, though, and it will forever live in my brain. And then we had a listener on our Instagram, Changing Shades, say, I think it was the first horror novel I ever read to completion. I don't think I was even 12, and it scared the shit out of me. I remember being impressed with how faithful the Curry version of the TV version was. Still top 5 King books, and I've read at least 60 of them. And I think that's like it reminds me of your memories of like, I watched this as a kid, and this Tim Curry one, even if I wasn't like necessarily like scared, though a lot of people were, like that is even though we have this modern interpretation, we have the book, like that, I do think of this Tim Curry one because his performance was like incredible. Which leads me to a question from our friend Warwick, who said, like, what is your favorite Pennywise, the book, the miniseries, or It Chapter 2? Especially because you grew up with a miniseries.
I think probably the Tim Curry one. I just think that it's so effective. Like, I told you before we started watching all of this, after we had finished the books, like, the miniseries is creepy. It's creepy as opposed to, like, parts of it are scary, and obviously it's reinterpreting the fear of these kids, but there's just something about Pennywise because he's a real clown.
He's a real clown, and he also, I think the thing that the miniseries does really well, which we just talked about, but specifically with Pennywise and Tim Curry, is that he seems non-threatening until he's threatening.
Yes.
He has that like childlike clown. He actually feels like a clown instead of like the modern one is like, I'm a scary monster
I'm
in
a
clown
monster.
makeup.
Yeah.
Whereas the Tim Curry one's like, I'm a clown. Psych, I have a mouthful of razor teeth, and also like, look at me do this weird backflip, and I'm going to jump out of you from a picture. Like,
right. And that feels like such a great interpretation of what happens in the book too, where like there are adults who see Pennywise in the book, but they just kind of like...
Oh yeah, that really
it.
violent thing that happened in our history. I do remember seeing a clown.
You know,
That's
super weird. And like talking to the adults, where Mike's like, "So was there anyone there?" And he's like, "Oh, you mean the clown?" Like, yeah.
Which is why I think the dairy interludes are really important.
Yeah, and like I mean, they talk about that in the Bradley gang, that there's like 3 different people who are like, "Yeah, this clown was like totally out the window, not just his torso, like his whole body was out the
like
window,
floating."
Yeah, and like the way that they talk, adults as they start to remember the clown talk about it, makes sense too. That you could see something that looks like the Tim Curry clown and be like, I mean, I guess there was a circus in town. Like maybe this clown just showed up. Like,
but if you saw the Stella or the Bill Skarsgård one, you would be like, well, that's a monster.
What the fuck is that dude doing?
That's a literal fucking monster.
I do like in It Chapter
the scene where he's
yes,
doing
where he
the
just
white
puts
paint.
the grease paint on.
Yeah,
yes.
I like that a lot.
I thought it was very effective.
I thought that was super effective
because I think it grounds it too in the idea that they like he's not a man, because he is actually a cosmological entity, but that they are like, a clown is a person. It's a man. He exists. He has this like corporeal being, which like is not actually true, but that the idea that a human being could put on clown paint and do this kind of shit is so much scarier than the idea of
the killer clowns of the pandemic.
Yeah, exactly. I'm glad those killer clowns just like went away. There's a pop culture article that we read that I knew about before you sent it to me, that in 2016 there was like an epidemic of people dressing up like clowns and just like lurking in the woods and trying to get kids to like come into their vans.
Just, like white men being awful.
Yeah, and then it just like stopped. Like no one was ever arrested. No one was ever like charged with any like menacing in any sense. They just stopped doing it. But it was before It Chapter 1 came out too, which felt very like it wasn't a reaction to the fact that this was happening. It was just like, this is just something that we as a society find very creepy. The idea that you can put on makeup and be hidden.
Are you afraid of clowns? Do you feel?
No.
Me neither.
No, I don't. I think the idea of somebody putting on a disguise in that way is menacing and frightening, and so I understand why people connect to that. Also, like, as a culture, there is a very famous serial killer, BTK, who was a clown, and like his clown makeup actually scary, because like the idea with clowns is that they've got like round curves and there are these like soft edges, and his were all like triangular. He had like pointy eyes, and he like did the like almost Joker like smile, which like there's an incongruity to that. When you see a clown like that, you're like, wrong. That's fucking wrong. It's not supposed to be like that. And so I also understand how people could see a clown more like the Skarsgård one, where it's like, wrong. This is not what a clown is supposed to look like. What the fuck is going on here? Whereas with the Tim Curry one, like you were saying, there's this like childlike wonder that he still sits inside.
Right, you buy that Georgie would be like, okay.
I don't know why there's a clown in the sewer, but like,
he seems nice. Whereas like it's less, though I do think the little kid that played Georgie in the new one does a good job of being like, what the fuck? And like also like being like, I want my boat back because I want to do it to my brother, or I want to give it to my brother. I think that makes sense. I do think the little kid that plays Georgie in the new ones is very good.
Yeah, he does a great job.
He does a great job.
I like when they reinterpret him in the cellar too, and he's just screaming at Bill, like that horror too of Bill feels directly responsible for his brother's death.
Yeah. This question is from our listener, Kat. She asked, what fear do you think would have appeared to you? Like, what would a Pennywise have manifested as?
Oh, that's a really good question.
Mine would probably be like one of my teachers just like screaming about how I'm a failure. Let's be real. As I read academic articles for fun.
Yeah. I mean, the thing that I used to have nightmares about as a kid was like this was before Scream came out, and so the only way that I can like explain it to people is to say that it sort of looked like Ghostface, but it was before those movies came out, so it's like just like
a long creepy face.
Yeah, like a long white face that's like the specter of death. Even though, again, as a kid, death didn't really scare me. Like the idea of something like rising out of negative space and
negative space is the scariest thing when you're a child. Like, if I was a kid, what it would have manifested as is. The thing I was the most scared of as a kid is this fake monster I made up in my head that I deemed the Lollipop Man, because the way my bed was is like I would look out my bed as I was laying down. It would go directly into my mom's room. Like our doors were lined up, and around the corner is in my mom's room was like the master bathroom, or the like bedroom bathroom. And I would always imagine I would like look into the dark, and my eyes would do whatever they do when you look into the dark and negative space, whatever. And I would like imagine this like stick figure with like a round head just walking from that bathroom into the hallway into my room, because there's a direct line, like an L shape. And so I was just terrified of this like fake thing that my brain made up in the negative space. Negative space when you're a kid is the fucking scariest thing. Lollipop Man is coming for me. It's fucking scary.
Yeah, I think some kind of like, because like ghosts don't freak me out. That's not
ghosts are sexy.
Yeah, ghosts are sexy. That's not a thing that I would interpret that as. But like the like visage of death like appearing and like looming over me, I think is probably what it would have appeared as. If it had to be like a human-like character, it probably would have been like, I mean, I've said this many times, my biggest fear is showing up to something and like, oh, you're in this play, here are your lines, you don't know what you're doing, which is like,
we traumatize you every month.
I know.
Plan 9 show.
That's true, but like it's different than like, oh, you've been given this role in like a professional production that here you are a lead and you do not have any idea what the fuck you're doing. That like unprepared feeling is like truly terrible. I still have nightmares about that, even though I'm not an actor anymore. It's probably because I get tortured every month at Plan 9.
Love to keep your fears alive. And then because it's me, our friend Kat wrote, would you rather fuck Tim Curry's Pennywise or Bill Skarsgård's Pennywise?
Tim Curry's 100%.
Yeah.
Again, I mean, he doesn't look like a monster.
I am a monster fucker, but I'm not like a clown fucker. So it's just like kind of hard to like really jump that gap for me.
Yeah. There's something that's like deeply unappealing. Also, I don't know if you've ever seen this photo. There's a backstage photo of Tim Curry when they were filming the miniseries where he's wearing like a blanket over himself and he's got an umbrella and he's smoking a cigarette. And there's something about that photo that I've always loved. Like not in a sexy way, not like, hey, I want to fuck that guy dressed as a clown.
Fuck that clown.
But like just in a way that's like, I just love that photo so much. And so that's what I think of when I'm like, which of these am I going to fuck? It's like, that's the photo that I'm thinking of. I'm not necessarily even thinking of Tim Curry in the movie. So it's like hard to separate that for me. So definitely the Tim Curry one.
All right. So this is a point where I say thank you for being on the podcast.
Thank you very much for having me.
Where can people find you?
You can follow me on Instagram at NYDurgency. It's the only account of mine that's not private. So you can follow me there. I mostly just post books. So hope you like books.
Like It.
Yeah, like It. The book.
Right. I'll see you on literally all of our other podcasts.
Yep. I'll see you then. Thanks. Goodbye.
Bye.
Come join the clownets. You'll float down here. We'll float down here.
All right, so each episode, we're going to end with what I'm calling my Nightmare Corner with my producer, Bobby Hoffman. I, like I said in the beginning, used to have these like horrific nightmares. Like I would see literally a scene from something and I would have nightmares for months. The one that comes to mind is I saw the opening scene of American Horror Story Coven and I truly had nightmares for like 6 months. And so this is like a test since we're not like watching things together. Like I have had time to sleep and stuff. And this is like, did I have a nightmare? I didn't. But I will say, like I said a little bit with Erin, is there was one scene in the book of It that I had to stop listening to for a second. Like I was driving at night and it was the scene where adult Ben meets Pennywise in the library and Pennywise gets the like vampire like glass teeth.
Yes.
And like chomps down and
Yes.
his mouth is full of blood. And I was like, whoa, I don't know what it is about that. But and I'm not somebody who's like weird with teeth stuff, but I was like, something about this scene is really fucking me up. I can't listen to this anymore.
It's well written and, by your account, very well spoken in the audiobook.
Yeah.
I might go back and listen to that now. So
I think just the idea of being in like your safest space, like the library is Ben's safe space, and like he's getting his memory back, and he's like, "Oh, I took some of my architectural designs from this library. This library is so important to me. I'm reliving this. I'm remembering how much I love this library, and then to be in your safest space, confronted by your biggest fear." And then just have that fear not rush at you. Like we were saying, like chapter 2 overcompensates. Like he just stands there, looks at you, and his mouth fills with blood.
the biggest part of it is part of them remembering again is part of it getting stronger again.
Yeah.
And he doesn't really let them relive any of their childhood glories or happiness together for too long before he reminds them, no, I'm here too.
Right. And it's also in the middle of the day.
Right.
Nobody else can see him.
Yes.
Ben kind of like accidentally made himself seem like a creepo because he like pretended like he had a kid but then didn't have a kid and is like, well, I'm just visiting friends. I know Mike. Like, so he had to like backtrack. So this girl's already like, this guy's kind of maybe a weirdo. So he has to pretend to not be seeing this. And it's interesting because in the movie they have Richie, or in the miniseries they have Richie go back to the library and he has that scene and it's okay. But like there's something about Ben in the library having to dummy up, which is like my favorite line that Bill says when they're at the Chinese restaurant where they have to pretend to not see anything. That's my only complaint about the modern day interpretation is that they don't dummy up, right? They like are beating the table and stuff. Like I thought it was a really important point. Like nobody else can see this. This woman can't see this. We have to pretend that we're not seeing this table full of like monsters and blood. Like we have to pretend nobody else can see this.
It's another instance of them being able to work together as a team, as a unit together, just like the laundromat again.
Totally. Bill says, dummy up, and everyone's like, oh, fuck. And they do it. They like...
And they all know what that means intrinsically as well.
Because they have their own language,
right?
I just, I think that's part of the reason, now just talking about it, I think that's the reason that scene was the scariest for me. It's like being attacked in your safest space is terrifying.
So, you just talked with Erin a little earlier about the Lollipop Man.
The Lollipop Man.
And I think we're going to use that as kind of a measuring stick, if you will, as we go through all of these different horror things. So now we will introduce the Lollipop scale.
What's it, 1 to 5?
I think 1 to 5 is pretty good.
Okay.
1 being lights are on. That's just the shirt that I left in the hallway. 5 being no light exists anywhere in the world anymore. The Lollipop Man is coming for me. He's inside my bedroom.
Oh, no. Okay.
And I think we should go through these individually.
For sure.
So we'll go book, and then we'll go TV miniseries, and then new movies. 1 to 5 on the Lollipop Man scale.
Okay, book, 4. because there were points where I had to stop.
Yes.
And that is, especially with books, like I know that my whole thing is like spooky 30s, like I'm not afraid of things, but like I've never really been afraid reading books because I'm such like a nerd. No, but like it's just different, right? It's your own imagination. You're controlling it in a different way. But that was one where I was like, I have to stop. I have to walk away from this for a second. Like, and there was, the library scene jumps out on me, but there was a couple times where I was like, I don't think I can be doing this right now. Like, I need a break from this, especially because it's 45 hours long, right? The miniseries, a 2.
Sure. Okay.
Like maybe 1.5. I don't think the miniseries is scary at all. I think it's the production value stuff, but I think it's really effective.
Okay.
So I wasn't scared, but and again, the scale is not me being like, this is good, this is bad. This is just my fear scale.
Absolutely, yes.
It chapter 1, I would give it a 3 because I think it starts really scary. But then as they bring in more of the like CGI elements and stuff, it gets less scary. But like the opening scene in the basement with Georgie and when Georgie dies and then like how the like funeral and how Bill and his friends go into the like sewer for the first time. Like I think it opens really scary, but then it gets a little like it overcompensates. And then it chapter 2, I think I would give it a 2. I don't think it's very scary at all.
Yeah. No,
even though it has
too
more
hard, like you
they
said.
go way too hard.
I think as well. It ends up looking either cartoonish or we're so used to these big budget CGI Marvel action movies that end with the giant spider. Like it just looked like the fucking Avengers. It didn't. Yeah.
It did suffer from a lot of endgame problems.
Yes, it did. Absolutely. And then the other question we are going to ask every episode, and I think you already answered it, is there one mental image that sticks with you? And it's the library.
It's the library scene from the whole, if I had to pick one from the whole thing, it's the library scene in the book when Ben meets Pennywise as an adult. It starts off so beautiful, like the reminiscing, and then like he asks for a library card because he wants something from his childhood, and it's so sweet, and it's just ruined by this fucking clown. Like it's very scary.
I don't think this podcast is going to be you watching these things and thinking you're not going to be afraid of them anymore. I think it's going to be you ready to face these things.
Or realizing what's scary to me now.
Exactly.
I think
and why I think is important.
Yeah, I think part of my problem as a kid is I was like, I deemed that I was afraid of things, so I wouldn't participate in them. And then I would build them up in my head a lot. So I was like, that's scary. Or I would see, or like for the American Horror Story Coven one, I'm pretty sure that's still a trigger for me. The like hardcore body like torture.
There
like I don't like
some
torture
things like that
porn.
Will always work.
Pretty sure that would still give me a nightmare. Whereas I'll watch a whole series of Hannibal and be like, I don't know, I just want him to kiss. We all have our levels, right?
Whatever. It's a throat violin.
Who cares? That's normal. So that is it. That is it. LOL. Sorry. I made myself laugh. So that's the first episode of Spooky 30s. It is uncharacteristically long, I think. I guess I don't know because we haven't recorded anymore. But we did cover a lot. I hope you enjoyed it. And again, if you ever wanted to read the book, I highly recommend the audiobook. This is not, I'm not getting paid by Stephen King for this. Though he should pay me. I watched all of his fucking properties. If you want to follow the show, you can follow us on Twitter at NYD Productions and use the hashtag Spooky30s with a 3 and a 0. If you want to follow me, you can follow me at Stella_Cheeks on Twitter. And you can follow Bobby at Haberdasher9K on Twitter. And just a reminder, if you want to follow Erin, she's at NYD Urgency on Instagram, because her Twitter is private. If you have any questions or want to reach out, you can email us at nydpods@gmail.com. All of the articles we talked about will be linked below. Some of them are academic articles, so they will just take you to a DOI that you would probably have to pay for. But if you go to our Patreon at patreon.com/NYD Productions, maybe somebody will give you a semi-illegal hookup for some of these articles. And at our Patreon, you can get extra content like our notes for this episode or our tester episode that we did for this podcast. You can get access to our Patreon for only $1, and that includes access to our Discord. I hope you enjoyed the first episode. You can join us next month on the 13th when I'll be joined with my special guest, producer Bobby Hoffman, where we will be talking about The Thing, which Bobby thinks is really going to scare me because I have a lot of body horror problems. And until then, I've been Stella Cheeks, and after 30 plus years of getting over my fears, monsters just make me horny now.
Spooky 30s is created by Stella Cheeks and produced by Bobby Hoffman for NYD Productions. Our show theme is made by Resonate_music, and our show art is by Lauren Moran.